The heavy glass door of the Emerald Leaf franchise hissed shut behind Li Wei, cutting off the humid roar of the San Francisco afternoon and replacing it with the sterile, hyper-filtered scent of expensive matcha and white lilies. The shop was a shrine to minimalism, all polished marble, brushed gold accents, and air that felt like it cost money just to breathe. Li Wei adjusted the strap of his faded messenger bag, feeling the weight of his 12-hour warehouse shift in every joint. His hoodie was damp from the light drizzle outside, and his work boots felt embarrassingly loud against the pristine floor. He took a deep breath, trying to smooth his messy hair. It was his daughter May's 6th birthday, and she had been talking about the sparkle tea from this specific shop for months. He reached into his pocket, fingering a crumpled $20 bill, his heart softening at the thought of her face lighting up. At the counter, Chad Harrington didn't bother looking up from his tablet. He was busy adjusting a display of $30 artisan tumblers, his movements practiced and full of self-importance. His hair was slicked back with enough pomade to catch the light like a mirror, and his tailored navy suit looked sharp enough to cut glass. When Li Wei finally stepped into the queue, Chad's nostrils flared. He didn't see a customer, he saw a blemish on his carefully curated aesthetic. He let out a long, audible sigh, his eyes scanning Li Wei's worn clothes with a mixture of pity and disgust before finally landing on the loyalty app open on Li Wei's phone. Li Wei offered a tired, polite smile. "Good afternoon," he said softly. "I'd like to order a signature strawberry cream tea with the birthday glitter topping, please." Chad didn't respond. He snatched the phone from Li Wei's hand as if it were contaminated, staring at the name on the screen. A slow, mocking smirk spread across his face, and he looked over Li Wei's shoulder to the line of wealthy regulars behind him. "Li Wei?" Chad drawled, purposefully mangling the pronunciation into a sharp, ugly, Li Wei. He chuckled, a dry, condescending sound that echoed in the quiet shop. "Is that supposed to be a name or a question? Li Wei? Or maybe it's just, Little Wei?" The teenage barista behind the counter shifted uncomfortably, but Chad ignored her. He leaned over the counter, invading Li Wei's personal space, his expensive cologne clashing with the faint smell of industrial cardboard clinging to Li Wei's hoodie. "Listen, Mr. Wei," Chad said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was designed to be heard by everyone. "We take pride in our brand image here. We're an elite establishment. I think you might have wandered into the wrong neighborhood. There's a cheap corner shop in Chinatown about 10 blocks that way. They're used to, well, people like you. They probably won't care if you can't spell your own name." Behind Li Wei, a woman in a designer yoga set tapped her manicured nails against her leather clutch. "Honestly, Chad," she sighed, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. "I'm in a rush for my Pilates class. Can we move this along? Some of us actually have places to be. It's so exhausting when people who clearly can't afford the menu stand around and gawk. It really lowers the vibe of the whole street." Chad nodded fervently at her, his expression shifting into one of sycophantic warmth. "I completely agree, Samantha. It's a constant struggle to maintain standards." He turned back to Li Wei, his face hardening into a mask of pure arrogance. He took the $5 bill Li Wei had pulled out to pay for the extra topping and flicked it back across the marble counter. It fluttered to the floor, landing near Li Wei's dirty boots. "Go on, pick it up and get out. You're loitering, and you're making the real customers uncomfortable. We don't serve people who bring their village attitudes into my shop." Li Wei looked down at the bill on the floor, then back up at Chad. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. There was a sudden, chilling stillness in his eyes that Chad was too blinded by pride to notice. "Names carry history, Chad," Li Wei said, his voice low and steady. "They carry the legacy of the people who built the world you're standing in. You should be very careful how you treat the people who are part of that history." Chad let out a bark of laughter, reaching for his phone to record the interaction for his social media followers. "Oh, listen to the philosopher in the rags. Get a life, Li Wei. If I ever see you in my store again, I'm calling security. Now, out." He made a shooing motion with his hand as if he were dismissing a stray dog. Li Wei didn't say another word. He picked up his bill, straightened his bag, and walked toward the exit. As the glass door closed behind him once more, he felt the jade pendant hidden beneath his hoodie, a gift from a father who had designed the very foundations of the city Chad thought he owned. The storm was coming, and Chad Harrington had no idea he had just invited it inside. The damp chill of the San Francisco evening seeped through Li Wei's hoodie, but the coldness he felt inside had nothing to do with the weather. He stood on the sidewalk, watching his breath mist in the air, his eyes fixed on the glowing green neon of the Emerald Leaf sign. As the world rushed past him, commuters in expensive wool coats, tech workers glued to their iPhones, Li Wei felt a familiar, heavy tug in his chest, pulling him back 20 years into a memory that smelled of sawdust, sweat, and cheap cigarettes. In his mind, he was 8 years old again, sitting on a rusted toolbox in the middle of a skeletal construction site. The California sun was relentless, beating down on his father's tanned, weathered neck. His father, Chen, was a man of few words and calloused hands, a master architect in their home country who was now reduced to hauling bags of cement for a man who couldn't even pronounce his name. Li Wei remembered watching his father during his lunch breaks. While the other workers napped, Chen would pull out scraps of discarded plywood and a stubby carpenter's pencil. With steady, rhythmic strokes, he would sketch intricate blueprints, grand arches, sustainable glass facades, and gardens that seemed to breathe. One afternoon, the site foreman, a man with a booming voice and a cruel streak, had snatched one of those plywood sketches away. He had laughed, mocking the elegant Chinese characters scrawled in the margins, and tossed the wood into a scrap fire. Chen didn't fight back. He simply watched his dreams turn to ash, then looked at his son with eyes that were tired but clear. Li Wei, he had said, his voice a gravelly whisper. They can steal our designs. They can cheat us out of our pay because we don't speak their tongue. But they can never steal the honor in our name. You carry that name like a shield. Never let them make you feel small for it. That was the year Chen's brilliant scouting reports for this very district were stolen by a corporate firm, leaving them in a cramped studio apartment while a multi-million-dollar empire rose on the land he had discovered. The flashback shifted, the colors sharpening as a different memory surfaced, one of a young Chad Harrington. In this memory, Chad was a teenager at an elite private academy, leaning against a lockers with an insufferable smirk. He wasn't working, he was presiding. He was surrounding a scholarship student, a boy whose shoes were scuffed and whose lunch was packed in a plastic bag. Chad's father stood nearby, draped in a cashmere overcoat, watching his son humiliate the boy with a nod of approval. The world is divided into predators and prey, Chad, the older Harrington had said, loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. Make sure you're the one holding the leash. Don't let the help forget where they belong. The memory shattered like glass as a loud rap on the window of the Emerald Leaf brought Li Wei back to the present. Chad was standing on the other side of the glass, a sneer plastered across his face. He held up his smartphone, tapping the screen to show he was recording a video, then made an exaggerated shooing motion with his hand, mocking Li Wei for the benefit of his followers. He looked like a king defending a castle made of plastic and overpriced tea. Li Wei didn't move. He reached inside his hoodie and felt the cool, smooth surface of the jade pendant hanging from a simple cord around his neck. It was the only thing his father had left him, a symbol of a legacy that Chad Harrington couldn't comprehend. Chad thought he was looking at a broken man in a damp hoodie, a nobody he could delete with a swipe of a finger. He had no idea that the village he had mocked was actually a global conglomerate called Ether Holdings. He had no idea that the man standing in the rain didn't just have a difficult name, he held the deed to the very ground Chad was standing on. Li Wei took one last look at the manager's laughing face, his jaw tightening with a newfound resolve. He wasn't just a victim of a bad afternoon anymore. He was a man who remembered exactly who he was, and more importantly, he remembered exactly what his father had lost. As he turned away into the shadows of the city, he pulled out his own phone, not to record a TikTok, but to make the one phone call that would start the clock on Chad Harrington's career. The next morning, the sun was deceptively bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the sidewalk as Li Wei returned to the Emerald Leaf. This time, he wasn't alone. Clutching his hand was 6-year-old May, her dark hair tied in 2 bouncing pigtails with sparkly pink ribbons. She was wearing her favorite birthday dress, a tulle-skirted outfit that she had saved specifically for this outing. Li Wei had spent the morning trying to shake off the humiliation of the previous day, telling himself that his daughter deserved to see the beautiful shop her grandfather's work had inspired, regardless of the man behind the counter. But as soon as the chime above the door rang, the air in the shop turned ice cold. Chad Harrington was holding a crystal carafe of oat milk, lecturing a new trainee, but he froze the second he saw Li Wei. His face didn't just register annoyance, it contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. He set the carafe down with a heavy thud and walked toward the register, his eyes narrowing. "You have got to be kidding me," Chad said, his voice dripping with a sneer that made May shrink back behind her father's leg. "I thought I told you yesterday that this wasn't a homeless shelter. Did you lose your hearing along with your dignity?" Li Wei took a steadying breath, his grip tightening protectively on May's small hand. "It's my daughter's birthday," he said, keeping his voice low and even. "She's been looking forward to a strawberry cream tea. We are here as paying customers, Chad. Just one drink, and we'll leave." Chad leaned over the counter, his shadow falling over the little girl. He didn't even look at Li Wei, he looked directly at May, his lip curling in disgust. "Sorry, sweetie," he drawled, his voice mockingly sweet and high-pitched. "But we have a very strict policy here. We don't serve people who can't spell their own names correctly. It's a brand thing. Maybe your daddy can take you to the dumpster behind the grocery store? I'm sure you'll find something there that's more your speed." May's bottom lip began to tremble. She looked up at her father, her big eyes filling with tears of confusion and shame. "Daddy, why is the man being mean?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Behind Chad, Marcus, the assistant manager, stepped forward. Marcus was a tall, soft-spoken man who had worked at the shop for 3 years to pay for his mother's medical bills. He couldn't stay silent any longer. "Chad, man, come on," Marcus muttered, reaching for a small sample cup. "It's a kid's birthday. I'll just give her a taster, it's on me." Chad whirled around, his face turning a blotchy, angry red. "You do not speak unless I tell you to speak, Marcus," he screamed, the veins in his neck bulging. "You give that brat so much as a drop of water and you can pack your bags and join them on the street. Do I make myself clear?" Marcus flinched, his hands shaking as he lowered the cup, his eyes full of silent, helpless apology. The tension in the room snapped when Samantha, the regular from the day before, sauntered in. She didn't even wait to order. She pulled out her iPhone and started recording, a smug, delighted grin on her face. "Oh my God, is he back again?" she asked, laughing as she panned the camera from Li Wei's work boots to May's tear-streaked face. "Look at this, guys. This is what happens when you let just anyone into the neighborhood." "Your daddy is a loser, honey," she said, looking directly into the lens. "He can't even get you a $5 drink because he's too busy playing victim." "Leave my daughter out of this," Li Wei said, his voice finally vibrating with a dangerous edge. "Or what?" Chad challenged, grabbing the store phone. "I'm done playing games with you, Li Wei. I'm calling the cops. I've got witnesses saying you're harassing my staff and trying to steal from the tip jar." He began dialing 911, staring Li Wei down with a triumphant, predatory smirk. "By the time they get here, you'll be lucky if you only end up in a cell. I'll make sure the social workers hear all about how you're bringing a child into a crime scene." As the sirens began to wail in the distance, Li Wei stood perfectly still. He felt the weight of the handcuffs before they were even on his wrists. He felt the sting of the judgmental stares from the other customers who had begun to gather, whispering and nodding in agreement with Chad. But as the officers entered and began to lead a sobbing May away toward his aunt's car, Chad leaned in one last time, whispering so only Li Wei could hear. "I'm going to make sure your Chinese name is blacklisted from every shop on this block. You're erased, pal." Li Wei stopped at the door, the cold metal of the cuffs biting into his skin. He didn't look at Chad. He looked directly into the lens of the lead officer's body camera. "My name is Li Wei," he said, his voice echoing with a haunting, granite-like authority that made the officer pause. "Remember it, because by tomorrow, it's the only name you're going to be hearing." The fluorescent lights of the holding cell hummed with a maddening, low-frequency buzz that seemed to vibrate against Li Wei's skull. He sat on the hard metal bench, his back straight, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He didn't look like a man who had just been arrested for theft and harassment. He looked like a man waiting for a delayed flight. Across the precinct, he could hear the muffled laughter of officers watching a video. No doubt the skewed TikTok Chad had uploaded, which had already racked up 100,000 views under the caption "Crazy Loiterer Gets What He Deserves." The world saw a delinquent. Li Wei saw a chessboard. The heavy iron door groaned open, and a man in a sharp, $3,000 charcoal suit stepped in. It was Robert Sterling, the top corporate litigator for Ether Holdings. He didn't look at the guards. He walked straight to the bars with a look of profound apology. "Sir, I am so sorry," Robert whispered, his voice thick with genuine concern. "The bail is processed. We could have had you out 3 hours ago if you'd just let me call the commissioner." Li Wei stood up slowly, the joints in his knees popping. "No, Robert. I needed to see it from the inside. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot goes." He stepped out as the cell door was unlocked, his tired warehouse hoodie looking bizarre next to the high-powered attorney. Robert handed him a sleek leather folder. "You were right about the manager, Chad Harrington. He's not just a bigot, he's a thief. We've been running the numbers on that franchise location. He's been skimming nearly 15% of the monthly revenue into a private offshore account, likely to fund his own expansion bid. He thinks he's buying the Western region rights next month." A cold, thin smile touched Li Wei's lips. It was the false defeat, the moment the predator thinks the prey is cornered, only to realize they've been lured into a cage. "He wants to buy the region?" Li Wei asked, his voice dropping an octave, losing its soft, humble edge. "Then let him try. Let him spend every stolen cent he has on the deposit. I want him to feel like he's touched the sun right before I take the sky away from him." He looked at the legal documents, seeing the list of health violations and the evidence of Chad using industrial-grade synthetic syrups while charging customers for organic botanicals. Meanwhile, a few blocks away at a rooftop bar, the clinking of martini glasses drowned out the sound of the city. Chad Harrington was leaning back in a velvet booth, his arm draped around the back of the seat, basking in the glow of his phone screen. "Did you see the comments?" He laughed, showing the screen to Samantha. "Everyone is calling him Li Wei the loser. My engagement is through the roof. The corporate office is going to love this. I'm cleaning up the brand, making it exclusive again." Samantha giggled, sipping her drink and adjusting her pearls. "Honestly, Chad, you're a hero. People like that need to know their place. It's about time someone had the guts to say it." Chad toasted the air, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous, unchecked hubris. He truly believed he had won. He believed Li Wei was a ghost, a forgotten mistake in a damp hoodie. Li Wei stood on the sidewalk outside the precinct, the night air finally clear. He reached into the folder and pulled out a single document, an emergency, brand audit and asset seizure, order. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was the architect. He looked at Robert and spoke with a terrifying, quiet clarity. "Change of plans, Robert. Don't file the defamation suit yet. I want him at the grand opening tomorrow. I want the mayor there. I want the cameras there. I want him to stand on that stage and tell the world exactly who he is." He paused, looking at his father's old architectural compass, which he still carried in his pocket. "He told me he was going to erase my name. Tomorrow, I'm going to make sure the world never forgets it." The next 48 hours were a blur of cold steel, high-definition screens, and the quiet, rhythmic clicking of keyboards. Inside the glass-walled war room of Ether Holdings, Li Wei stood at the center of a digital hurricane. Gone was the faded hoodie and the smell of the warehouse. He was now surrounded by the scent of fresh espresso and the crisp ozone of high-end servers. He watched as his forensic accountants dismantled Chad Harrington's life piece by piece. Every skimmed dollar, every falsified invoice for cheap, synthetic syrups, and every deleted health safety warning was being meticulously catalogued into a digital guillotine. Li Wei felt no rush of anger now, only a profound, surgical focus. He wasn't just planning a firing, He was executing a systemic purging of the poison Chad had introduced to his father's legacy. Back at the Emerald Leaf, the atmosphere was nauseatingly celebratory. Chad was in his element, barking orders at the exhausted staff as they draped gold-trimmed banners over the marble counters. He spent 10 minutes arguing with a delivery driver about the placement of a giant floral arrangement, snapping his fingers inches from the man's face. "No, you idiot. The lilies go next to the portrait of me, not the trash can," Chad hissed, checking his reflection in a polished brass espresso machine. He was wearing a new, $1,000 watch, funded entirely by the money he'd siphoned from the employee pension fund. He felt untouchable, a king preparing for his coronation as the new regional director. He even took a moment to post another video, laughing as he showed off the exclusive new menu items that Marcus knew were actually made from expired, off-brand ingredients hidden in the back of the walk-in freezer. Marcus moved through the shop like a ghost, his phone hidden in the palm of his hand. Following the secret instructions sent by Li Wei's legal team, he moved into the storage room, his heart hammering against his ribs. He angled his camera toward the stacks of counterfeit, organic matcha bags, which were actually filled with sugar-heavy, dyed filler, and the crates of milk with expiration dates that had passed a week ago. Chad's voice boomed from the front of the shop, mocking a janitor for the way he was mopping the floor. "You missed a spot, Sparky. If you can't handle a mop, maybe I'll send you to work for that Li Wei guy in the holding cell. I hear he's looking for a cellmate." Marcus gritted his teeth, saved the footage to a secure cloud drive, and sent a single text message to an unknown number. "Everything is ready." The evidence is undeniable. As the sun began to set on the evening before the grand opening, a sleek, black luxury SUV with tinted windows pulled up across the street from the shop. Inside the quiet cabin, Li Wei sat in the back, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a tablet. He watched through the window as Chad stepped out onto the sidewalk, preening for a group of local influencers, his laughter carrying across the pavement like a jagged blade. Li Wei looked down at a photo of his daughter, May, who was safely tucked into bed at his aunt's house, her birthday crown still resting on her nightstand. He then looked at the architectural compass he held in his hand, the tool his father had used to dream of a better life. "The foundations are laid, Robert," Li Wei said quietly into his headset. "Chad thinks he's built a throne, but he's actually built a cage. He's spent years making people feel small because of their names, their clothes, and their bank accounts. Tomorrow, he learns that the person he tried to erase is the one who holds his entire world in the palm of his hand." He watched as Chad finally turned off the lights and locked the shop door, puffing out his chest with unearned pride. Li Wei signaled his driver to move. "Take the sign down tomorrow morning," he commanded, his voice as cold and certain as the coming winter. "I want the new one ready before the mayor arrives. It's time to show this city what great strength actually looks like." The morning of the grand concept opening arrived with a theatrical brilliance that only San Francisco could produce. The air was crisp, the sky a polished blue, and the storefront of the Emerald Leaf was swathed in heavy velvet curtains, hiding a secret renovation that had taken place under the cover of darkness. A red carpet rolled out across the sidewalk like a tongue of fire, welcoming the city's elite. Influencers with ring lights, local news crews, and even the mayor himself milled about, sipping champagne from flutes that caught the morning sun. At the center of it all stood Chad Harrington, vibrating with a manic, triumphant energy. He was draped in a tuxedo that cost more than a year's rent for most people, his hair lacquered into a stiff wave, and his teeth gleaming as he flashed a practiced, plastic smile at every camera lens. Beside him, Samantha preened like a peacock, wearing a vintage silk wrap and oversized sunglasses that she refused to take off, despite the shade. She adjusted her pearls and leaned toward a nearby reporter, her voice carrying that sharp, nasal edge of unearned authority. "It's just so refreshing to finally have a space that values exclusivity," she gushed, checking her reflection in the glass. "Yesterday, we had a bit of an incident with well, let's call him a disruptive element. But Chad handled it with such grace. It's important to keep the neighborhood's aesthetic pure, don't you think?" Chad beamed, patting his breast pocket where the forged expansion contract lay, ready for a ceremonial signing. He felt like a god standing on the threshold of his own empire. The crowd's chatter suddenly dipped into a confused murmur as a fleet of black luxury SUVs pulled up to the curb. The doors opened in perfect synchronization, and a team of security guards in charcoal suits stepped out, forming a corridor of silent, imposing muscle. From the lead vehicle emerged a man who stopped the breath in Chad's lungs. He was wearing a bespoke, three-piece Italian suit that fit him like a second skin, the fabric shimmering with a subtle, expensive sheen. His hair was perfectly groomed, and his presence commanded the entire block without him uttering a single word. Behind him walked the global CEO of Emerald Leaf, a legendary figure in the beverage industry who had flown in from Singapore specifically for this event. Chad blinked, his smirk faltering as he squinted at the man in the suit. There was something hauntingly familiar about the line of that jaw, the steady rhythm of that walk. As the man drew closer, the blood began to drain from Chad's face. The man wasn't wearing a faded hoodie. He didn't smell like warehouse cardboard. But the eyes were unmistakable. It was the Little Wei he had mocked, the Li Wei he had humiliated, the man he had sent to a holding cell less than 48 hours ago. You? Chad stammered, his voice cracking as he stepped forward, his hands trembling. What is this? How did you get that suit? Security. This man is a criminal. He was arrested on these very premises 2 days ago. Samantha, call the police again. This is a private, high society event, and this loiterer is trespassing. Samantha's jaw dropped so far her oversized sunglasses began to slip down her nose. She clutched her handbag to her chest as if the mere sight of Li Wei might stain her clothes. This is unbelievable, she hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. The audacity of people like this. He probably stole that car. Chad, do something. Li Wei didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of Chad, his height and posture making the manager look small, frantic, and cheap. He didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. He looked at Chad with a terrifying, clinical indifference. The global CEO stepped forward, placing a hand on Li Wei's shoulder with a level of deference that sent a shockwave through the gathered crowd. The cameras shifted focus instantly, the flashes becoming a strobe light of impending doom. Actually, Chad, the CEO said, his voice carrying the weight of a death sentence, I'd like to introduce you to the man who owns the land this shop is built on. The man who holds 70% of the shares in Ether Holdings, the parent company of this entire franchise. And the man who has spent the last 48 hours personally reviewing every single one of your financial records. Chad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He looked at the CEO, then back at Li Wei, his mind racing to find a way to spin the narrative, to find the joke, to find the exit. But there was no exit. Li Wei stepped onto the small wooden stage Chad had built for his own glory. He took the microphone from the podium, his voice resonating through the speakers with a deep, calm authority that silenced the entire street. He looked out at the influencers, the mayor, and finally, directly into the panicked eyes of the man who had tried to erase him. 2 days ago, Li Wei began, his voice echoing off the marble walls. This man told me that my name didn't fit the aesthetic of this neighborhood. Today, I'm here to show him that he was absolutely right. Because from this moment forward, his aesthetic no longer exists. The silence that followed Li Wei's words was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Chad Harrington stood frozen on the stairs of the stage, his face transitioning from a sickly pale to a bruised, panicked purple. The champagne flute in his hand trembled so violently that the liquid sloshed over the rim, staining his white silk shirt, but he didn't even notice. Li Wei reached into his jacket and pulled out a small remote. With a single click, the massive high-definition display behind the podium, the one Chad had intended to use for his self-congratulatory marketing montage, flickered to life. The first thing that filled the screen wasn't a corporate logo. It was a grainy, high-angle video of the store's interior from 2 days ago. The audio was crystal clear. The entire crowd heard Chad's mocking laugh. They heard him snicker about Little Wei and village attitudes. They watched him flick a $5 bill onto the floor like he was throwing trash at a beggar. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The mayor took a visible step back from Chad, his expression shifting from curiosity to utter revulsion. Samantha tried to duck behind a decorative pillar, her face burning with shame as the cameras caught her own recorded mockery playing on the giant screen for the world to see. "You called my name a nuisance, Chad," Li Wei said, his voice amplified through the speakers, steady as a heartbeat. "You thought that because I wore a hoodie and worked with my hands, I was beneath your notice. But while you were busy recording TikToks to humiliate a father and his daughter, Mateen was recording you." Li Wei clicked the remote again. The screen shifted to a series of forensic accounting spreadsheets and hidden camera footage from the storage room. The crowd watched in horror as Marcus's secret footage played, clear shots of Chad dumping industrial synthetic powder into organic tins and wiping the dust off expired milk cartons. The spreadsheets highlighted 15% of the shop's revenue flowing directly into a shell account under Chad's name. "This is a lie," Chad suddenly shrieked, his voice hitting a desperate, shrill note. "It's a deepfake. You're just some bitter immigrant trying to ruin a successful American businessman. Security, arrest him. This is my store. I built this." Li Wei stepped down from the podium, moving toward Chad with a slow, predatory grace. He didn't stop until he was inches from Chad's face. "You didn't build anything, Chad. You stole the credit for the land my father discovered, and then you stole from the company that gave you a chance. You don't own this franchise. As of 10 minutes ago, the board of directors has voted to terminate your contract for gross misconduct, embezzlement, and brand defamation. You aren't a businessman. You're a thief with a good tailor." The CEO stepped forward, handing a leather folder to a pair of police officers who had been waiting in the wings. "The evidence of financial fraud is all in there, officers," he said firmly. "As for the store, it is being seized and shuttered for a full health and safety overhaul immediately." Chad's knees finally gave out. He collapsed onto the red carpet, his expensive tuxedo bunching up around him as he began to sob, the ugly, snot-filled sounds of a man who realized he had lost everything in the span of 5 minutes. "Please, Mr. Li," he blubbered, reaching out to grab the hem of Li Wei's trousers. "I was just joking. It's just a name. I can pay it back. I'll do anything." Li Wei looked down at the man who had once tried to shoo him away like a dog. He didn't feel the surge of hatred he expected, he felt only a profound sense of justice. A name is the first thing a person is given and the last thing they leave behind, Chad. You tried to erase mine. Now, I'm erasing yours from this industry. You're not just fired. You're done. He turned away as the officers hoisted a screaming, pleading Chad to his feet and led him through the crowd of cameras, his disgrace immortalized in 1,000 flashes of light. Li Wei looked over at Marcus, who was standing by the counter with a look of pure shock and relief. "Marcus," Li Wei called out, his voice softening. "I think this neighborhood needs a new kind of leader. Someone who actually knows the value of hard work. Are you ready for a promotion?" As the crowd began to cheer, Li Wei walked toward the front of the shop. He looked up at the sign, where the Emerald Leaf logo was being covered by a temporary banner that bore the name his father had once dreamed of, the Jade Leaf. For the first time in 20 years, the air didn't feel cold. It felt like home. The dust eventually settled on the sidewalk outside the shop, but the reverberations of that morning changed the neighborhood forever. Chad Harrington's descent was swift and absolute. Deprived of his stolen funds and his carefully manufactured reputation, he watched as his world dissolved. Within months, he had lost the high-end condo and the luxury SUV. He found himself in a dingy apartment on the outskirts of the city, working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour manual car wash. Now, instead of polished marble floors, his world was one of freezing water, the smell of cheap industrial soap, and the relentless spray of high-pressure hoses. His new boss, a gruff man who had seen the viral video of Chad's downfall, made it a point to never call him by his actual name. Every night, the boss would bark orders at him, calling him Chud or Chad boy or simply hey, you. Chad would scrub the tires of luxury cars similar to the one he used to own, his hands cracked and red from the cold, finally understanding the weight of being treated like a ghost in your own life. Samantha didn't fare much better. The internet has a long memory, and her brand of exclusive elitism became a toxic asset. Her social circle, built on the shallow foundations of status and gossip, vanished overnight. She was dropped by her Pilates studio, banned from the elite charity galas she lived for, and eventually moved away to a city where no one knew her face. She spent her days trying to delete comments on her old social media posts, a digital hermit hiding from a world that had collectively decided she was no longer worth its attention. 5 years later, the corner of the street looked different. The sleek, cold atmosphere of the emerald leaf was gone, replaced by the warm, inviting glow of the jade leaf. The shop had become the heart of the community, a place where the air smelled of roasted tea leaves and fresh ginger. Marcus, now the regional director of the entire Western Division, ran the shop with a philosophy of radical kindness. He had established a scholarship fund for immigrant families and hosted weekend business workshops for young entrepreneurs who came from nothing, just like Li Wei's father once had. Li Wei stood by the window of the shop, a cup of tea warming his hands. He was older now, the lines around his eyes a little deeper, but he carried a peace that no amount of money could buy. He watched as his daughter, May, now 11 years old, walked through the door after school. She was confident and bright, greeting the staff by their names, and pronouncing them perfectly. She paused for a moment in front of the large portrait hanging near the entrance. It was a beautiful, hand-painted architectural sketch of the very building they stood in, framed in dark wood. Below the sketch was a simple brass plaque that read, "Chen Li, the architect of our soul." May looked up at her father and smiled, a smile that contained none of the shadows from that birthday 5 years ago. Li Wei walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. He looked out the window at the bustling city, a city that his father had helped build with silent, uncredited labor. He realized that true power didn't come from a title on a business card or the price tag on a suit. It came from the ability to look another human being in the eye and acknowledge their dignity, no matter what they were wearing or where they came from. He thought back to the man in the damp hoodie who had been told he didn't belong. That man was gone, but the lesson remained. Life has a way of balancing the scales, sometimes with a whisper and sometimes with a roar. As a young immigrant man entered the shop, looking a bit lost and hesitant, Li Wei saw the manager approach him. The manager didn't sneer, he didn't judge the man's dusty work clothes. Instead, he smiled warmly and asked, "Welcome to the Jade Leaf. May I ask how to pronounce your name correctly? I want to make sure we get it right." Li Wei took a final sip of his tea, the taste bitter and sweet all at once. Karma doesn't miss an address, it simply waits for the right time to knock on the door. A person's worth isn't found in the accent they carry or the coins in their pocket, but in the respect they give to the names of others. Because in the end, our names are all we truly own, and the way we treat them is the only legacy that lasts.